Object interactions. They're in most games, and while making games, you have probably created many, but might have run into the problem that as you make more and more interactions, your code gets more and more bloated with subsections dedicated to those objects. Or have had to repeat complex code for each different object to enable interactions, or maybe have wondered how you would interact with multiple objects at once. What we need to solve these problems is a middleman script. A middleman script is an individual script that our player can find and call a function, and then that function can alert any scripts connected to it that the interaction has been made. But this has a new problem. We need to make an interact script that can function with any other script we make that also doesn't require all of our objects to check for a player interaction every frame. And we can do this, as you probably have guessed from the title of this video, with event systems. An event system is a way of creating code that, rather than having multiple scripts monitoring a change in some value every frame, can instead lie dormant until an event is broadcasted that instructs them to run some code. So let's create a simple event system for object interactions. And to do this, let's create a script named something like interact, and then let's open it up. Once we're inside, let's first remove the start and update methods since we won't be needing them. And the first thing we need to do is actually create our event system, and we can do that by creating a new class at the bottom. So let's make a new public class named something like interact event. And the first thing we're going to need is a delegate, so let's put in a public delegate with a return type of void named something like interact handler. A delegate is basically a way of storing a list of methods that match the delegate's return type. In this case, the return type is void, so we can assign any method with a return type of void to this delegate. We will be using this delegate to store any methods from any other scripts we want to execute whenever our event is triggered. And because the methods we call will usually involve activating some kind of operation, like opening a chest for example, we can probably stick to our void return type. And next we need to create our event. So let's put public event that is of type interact handler, and let's name it something like has interacted. And now we need a method to call our event, so let's put in public void, and let's name it something like call interact event, and then let's point this to our event, so let's put lambda has interacted dot invoke. This question mark is telling our method to use our event as a nullable value type, or in other words, it's allowed to be null. This lets our event run even if it has no information without throwing a null reference exception, just in case there are no methods subscribed to this event, or maybe all the objects that were subscribed to this event have been destroyed, for instance. Now back in our interact class, let's make an instance of our interact event. So let's create a new variable of interact event, let's name it interact, and let's set it equal to a new interact event. And now this may seem a bit strange, but let's also add in whatever script acts as our main player's primary script. In this project, this is called player, so I'm going to add a new reference that is a type of player, and we can just call it player. Next, let's create the method that we will call whenever we find this interact script. Let's put in a public void named callInteract, and let's also require a player named interactedPlayer. This is the reason for the player reference. Whenever our player interacts with the script, they will be required to pass in their primary player script, and this will give us the ability to pass along that player reference to the objects that we are interacting with. And then inside our method, let's just set player equal to interactedPlayer, and then to set off our event, we just need to put interact.callInteractEvent. And now we need a way for our objects to grab the event in order to subscribe to it, and we can do that with a getProperty function. So let's put public interact event getInteractEvent, event, and then inside let's put a getReturn, and then let's first check to make sure that our interact event exists, and if it doesn't, let's make a new one. So let's put if interact equals null, and if it does, let's set interact equal to a new interact event, and then let's just return our interact event. Let's also do the same for our player, so let's make a public player getPlayer, and inside the get function let's return our player. Now let's set up our player interaction. In our player script, let's make a new public void method called playerInteract. We are going to be firing a ray out of the center of our camera into the scene to look for an object to interact with. And to do that, we need a layer mask. A layer mask is a binary 32-bit number where each layer is assigned to one of those bits. That's why we can only have a maximum of 32 layers. Each part of this number, because it's a binary number, can either be 1 or 0, and that represents true or false for each layer. So a layer mask that is all zeros would collide with nothing, while a layer mask that is all ones would collide with everything. We can easily create a layer mask by using a bit shift operator. If we take the number 1, which looks like this as a layer mask, and we use a left bit shift, we can move this 1 along the number by the amount put after the bit shift operator. So if we put 1 bit shift 3, it would move the 1 over 3 steps. By default, Unity uses layers 0, 1, 2, 4, and 5. For some reason. So if we were using layer 3 as our ground layer, and we wanted our ray to only collide with the default layer on layer 0 because our interactables are all on the default layer, and the ground layer on layer 3, so our ray is blocked by the ground layer for example, we could make layer masks of those layers by first making a layer mask that is equal to 1 bit shift 0, because we want to collide with the first layer which is layer 0, and then another layer mask that is 1 bit shift 3 to collide with the ground layer. And to combine these layer masks, we can make a final layer mask that is equal to our layer mask 0 or our layer mask 3. And now we have a layer mask for layer 0 and layer 3. Now let's set up our raycast. Let's make a local variable of raycastHit and name it hit, and let's make a local variable of ray named ray. And let's set ray equal to camera.main.viewportPointArray. ViewportPointArray is a function that returns a ray out of our camera based on the location we choose in the viewport. It uses a normalized scale on the x and y axis, meaning that the point in both directions is between 0 and 1. So choosing a location at 0.5 on the X and 0.5 on the Y will be the center of our screen. The Z-axis is ignored in this function, so we will set it to 0. And with that set up, we can now cast array. So let's put if physics.raycast, and let's pass in ray for our array, and then let's put out to out our information to our hit variable. Let's set the distance to something like 15. This may be a bit far, so you may want to lower this if you're able to interact with stuff a bit too far away, and then let's use our final mask for the layer mask. By the way, because a layer mask is just a binary number represented as an integer, it even says this in the physics.raycast syntax helper, we could also just use the decimal number that equals the binary number, because binary is just another word for number system base 2, rather than the decimal number system base 10 that we normally work with. For example, our layer mask here uses layers 0 and 3, which would be 1001, which in binary is the number 9, so passing in the number 9 as our layer mask gives the same results. And then inside, let's look for an interact script. Let's make a local interact variable, and let's call it interact script. Let's set it equal to hit.transform.getComponentInteract. Now we can check if we found anything. So let's put if interact script, and this will return true if it exists. And then we can put interact script.callInteract. And if you remember, our callInteract script requires a player, so let's use this to pass in our player script. And now to call this method, in our update function, let's put if input.getKeyDown, key code E, or whatever key you would like to use. Then we can call player interact. Now that we have an interact script and a way to use it, let's see how we can set up our objects to respond to the event. Let's say we have a chest script, and in this script we have a method we want to call to open and close the chest. To call the method, we need to subscribe it to our event system. First, let's create a public interact reference named something like open from interaction. Now to subscribe our method, let's use the onEnable function, and inside let's first check that our open from interaction reference isn't null. And if it's not, let's put open from interaction.getInteractEvent.hasInteracted plus equals open chest, or whatever your method is named for opening your chest. Now it's important to know that subscribing to events does store some memory, so we need to make sure that we are unsubscribing to the event whenever our object is disabled or destroyed, so we can avoid a memory leak. So let's also use the onDisable function, and let's repeat this process to subtract our method from the event whenever our object is disabled. OnDisable is also called when an object is destroyed, so this will handle both scenarios for us. Now we can add an interact script to our chest to let us directly interact with the chest. Or we could even reference an interact script on another object like a button to open the chest. Or any number of chests. An event system isn't limited to one method per system, so we could have one button interact with as many objects as our project can handle. There's also one more feature that our interact script has. Because its two references is either created in the script itself, or passed in by the player interacting with the script, our interact script has no setup, meaning we could add an interact script onto anything we want in code and make that object interactable. We just gotta subscribe to the event. For example, let's say we have an item pickup script, and we don't want to have to go through every item prefab in our project and add an interact script. We could instead add the interact script when the object is created. Our script has a method to give our player an item, but requires a player script to add said item. This is where our interact script having a reference to the player that interacted will come in handy. Let's again make a public interact reference, and now let's create a new method to subscribe to our event system that will grab our player reference from the interact script. So let's create a new public void named interact pickup, and inside let's just call our add item method, but for the player, let's use our get player property we created earlier. Now let's again use onEnable, and let's first check for an interact script on our object. So let's make a local interact variable named something like check, and let's set it equal to getComponentInteract. Then let's put if check, and if it exists, let's set our reference to the one found, and then subscribe our interact pickup method to the event. Now if we did not find an interact script, let's create one. Let's put else, and inside let's first create a local interact variable named addComp, and let's set it equal to this.gameObject.addComponentInteract, and this will add an interact script to our object. Now we can set our reference to this newly created interact script and subscribe our method to the event. And then in onDisable we can first check that we have a reference, and if we do we can unsubscribe from the event. And now we have items that will add an interact script automatically. And now we have our object interact system. I hope this video was helpful, and maybe brought some ideas on other cool ways to use event systems. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you liked the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.